All right, so appreciate everyone's time today, and thank you for taking time out of your day to talk about data subject rights. Um, what I'm going to cover today is a little bio, just to get for you all to get to know me, and then we'll do a brief intro into data subject rights, the purpose, what this looks like in practice. Some of the recommendations that I have for keys to success. We'll talk a little bit about design, and then I have some questions for the group. Does that sound good to everyone?
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah? All right. So just a bit about me. I'm a senior director of privacy operations at Intuitive. Prior to joining Intuitive, I was director for privacy operations, specifically focused on risk and controls, and director for regulatory governance. Regulatory governance, Microsoft covered kind of a broad space. So, kind of looking back at privacy operations, this was going deep into this very niche space of privacy. And then for regulatory governance, we were going quite broad. And so covering spaces of privacy, cybersecurity, responsible AI, and digital safety. So really looking at how can we implement efficient processes to streamline how all these different and yet somewhat similar groups can effectively conduct risk management from their particular spaces. And then prior to Microsoft, I was at Meta, where I led teams specifically focused on a few key parts of privacy. One of our key teams that I led was called Privacy Integrations. And so this really looked at how to implement data subject rights from the get-go, from the back end, before the products were launched. How can we really effectuate the most, efficient way to implement data subject rights, or rather the tooling behind that. I also led a team focused on incident response support, mergers and acquisitions, and audit readiness. And so all of this is suffice to say that I've seen privacy from a few different areas, always looking for ways to grow and to learn. And so that's my background. In the course of the next few slides, if people have questions as I'm going, please do not hesitate to raise your hands and ask your questions. This is meant to be kind of an interactive conversation. I'm not quite sure the familiarity level of everyone on the call, so if some people have a lot of questions, please feel free to ask those questions. I'm really excited to interact with you all. Okay, so I'm going to give a brief intro into data subject rights. As many of you are likely aware, there are primarily 8 data subject rights. But when we think about, what is a data subject? This is commonly referred to as an individual whose personal information may be processed, collected, stored by a business. And as many of you are probably already aware, personal information is and can be quite broad, especially when we consider the regional expectations and/or regulations that have already been set forth. While GDPR out of the EU is most commonly referred to when we think about DSRs or data subject rights, there are a whole host of other regulations globally that have implemented an expectation around data subject rights. Most notably, back in 2020, we can think about California being a predominant leader, at least from the US, when thinking about data subject rights. One key call out that I have here is the 2 most commonly exercised data subject rights are the right to access and the right to erasure. And so that will be something to think about as we go through the next few slides, talking in our discussion. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So when we think about DSRs, I tend to think about it from a business perspective, because we're thinking about, how can we really honor an individual's right to exercise their data subject rights. But from a business perspective, we want to be able to enable the business to do so. And there are a few key characteristics that we want to consider from a business perspective, which is doing so from an expedient manner. Obviously, the information must be accurate, and we want to be transparent about what we're doing as a business or what the business is doing. And another thing that I like to call out is that the laws and the regulations that talk about data subject rights, these are the minimum expectations. This is not something that, we're aiming to achieve, and anything below that is okay. We're actually looking to go above and beyond where possible, but obviously balancing the needs of the business. And ultimately, what we're trying to drive towards from every single company that I've worked for is really trying to build trust with the community. Because ultimately, when we're doing something that's ethical, that is expected of us, you're starting to build that trust, and that actually works as kind of a growth enabler for the business. And so it's a win-win there. And the reason why I call this out is that sometimes, compliance with regulations and various laws can be seen from a business perspective as sometimes as like a blocker or something that slows down product growth. But if you can do this efficiently from the earliest stages of data collection and the strategy behind that, it can really be a growth and sales enabler rather than a blocker or something that's slowing it down. Any questions there? No? Okay. So this next slide is meant to give you an idea of what does this look like in practice? How do we allow and enable consumers or individuals to exercise their privacy rights? And usually what that looks like is a cross-company collaboration, starting with the public-facing interface. What we have here is, some people or some companies rather, on their privacy policies or on their websites, they will have a contact form that will allow the company to receive that information or receive that inquiry from the individual. Some of the other companies, if they don't have a contact form, they'll just simply have an email alias. You will typically see a privacy operations team and or a privacy legal team that is the recipient of that information, who will then triage the inquiry. If it's a privacy operations team, which is what I would recommend, is having a dedicated privacy operations team, will then triage that inquiry and then decide if they can respond with, say, preset responses, because there are some pretty common inquiries that you may receive from a privacy operations perspective. And from there, the privacy operations team will make a decision as to whether or not they need to escalate it and seek more information from their partners or their stakeholders. And so let's say in a hypothetical, yes, they receive an inquiry and they need to dive a little bit deeper to understand or to be able to respond accurately and transparently with the individual. Usually that escalation will reach maybe two different teams, depending on the type of inquiry and the complexity. The legal team may be asked to review and provide support with their response, and product teams. So if it's product specific, where say the individual has a very specific type of request related to exercising, say, access to their information, that can be another way that a product team can be pulled in. From there, the information may get sent back to the privacy operations team, who will then draft the response for review, typically by the legal team. And then the privacy operations team will send it back to the individual, and then close out that data subject right request. I've made this very, very high level. You can imagine that, depending on the size of the company, depending on its visibility and the awareness of its customers, the volumes can vary. So, you can have volumes as low as, say, 10,000 or even 5,000 inquiries a year, all the way up to something as high as 100,000 inquiries a month or more. As privacy becomes more and more prevalent in the public domain and public awareness, the volumes will continue to increase. And so it's incumbent upon us as privacy professionals to ensure that we've got these systems and operations in place in order to meet the needs of the individuals and the expectations that they have for those businesses. Any questions so far?
I had one. You mentioned that they're kind of you kind of see repeated queries along the same theme. Would you mind sharing what some of the queries are about?
Absolutely. So most commonly, some people will write in and say, let's say that you were applying to a job at a company, we'll call it Company X, and you wanted to say, hey, I didn't get that job, but I want you, Company X, to delete all of my information related to my application. That is a pretty common inquiry that we're starting to see more and more prevalently in the industry. Another common inquiry that came, right after GDPR became effective, particularly from the French, was they said, we want you to delete everything. And so some of the inquiries that we received just said toot, T-O-U-T. I probably have mispronounced that, but they basically said delete everything, right? In terms of access is where, the type of inquiry that is sent out or that is submitted is, sorry, it's a little feedback. The type of inquiry that's submitted from an access perspective is typically like, hey, I want to access all the information that you're collecting on me. At which point it's incumbent upon the business, whether it's privacy operations or privacy legal, to ensure that, one, they are able to share that information back or give the user or the individual the ability to see the different types of data that the company has collected on them. This includes both direct data points that was provided by the individual, as well as inferred data points that the company may have created based off of connecting two different data points or multiple different data points about an individual. So those are some of the most common inquiries that you might see and how we have seen. Other types of inquiries that are a little bit less common on a day-to-day basis, but are very common whenever a new law becomes effective, regardless of the region. There are individuals who will basically take the language of the law, copy and paste it, and turn it into a question form, and then test the company to see how the company is actually able to meet the requirements of that newly effective law or regulation. Those ones are tricky because obviously the date that the new law becomes effective, that's really when you're under the gun from a regulatory perspective. And so that's even more reason why we need to be prepared as an organization, not just in privacy operations and legal, but an entire organization that's processing personal information, to be prepared to kind of hit the ground running well before that law becomes effective. Any other questions?
Yeah. You said individuals might reach out to see how well your company is able to follow these new regulations. Do you mean private individuals or maybe government representatives?
All of the above.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, it's a good question. Um, what I've seen, most commonly in the past is private individuals will reach out, usually when they're reaching out after a new law has been passed or is becomes effective. Um, what what we'll probably see is certain buckets of individuals and certain awareness or certain varying levels of awareness of what their rights may be specific to that law. So obviously people who may have a privacy or a legal or even a security background, they may be closer to our industry and they may, one, know when the law is effective, so they know the timing of when to submit that request. And then two, they may be trying to see and kind of get a baseline of what different companies across the board are doing. So, you know, various tech companies like Meta, like Google, like Apple, et cetera, they may receive the same inquiry across the board from the same individuals who are trying to kind of test the waters to see how these companies are stacking up against one another. From a government perspective, some companies like Microsoft have very strong relationships with various government entities. And so they may receive inquiries directly from their representatives or their partners that they've been working with, so through indirect channels. Others may receive inquiries directly from, say, an office of a regulator into their publicly available channel. So while the ideal situation is to have all of your inquiries funnel into this one public-facing channel, whether it's a contact form or an email domain, what is usually the case is that people are going to reach out, individuals will reach out from any kind of agency through multiple channels. And so from a privacy operations perspective, the ability for that operations team to identify all of the different public-facing touch points and funnel or really provide training to funnel those inquiries back into this single source allows you as an operations professional to quickly be able to respond within the mandated timeframes or sooner, and also to collect the proper metrics to understand the types of inquiries that are coming in, and then later use those metrics to improve what your operations is trying to streamline.
Thank you. I guess, do you think tech journalists might go through these channels to assess top companies' workflows? I mean, I know it
100%.
sounds niche. Okay, okay, that makes
Nope.
sense.
Yeah, it's actually quite common, especially depending on the company. As you're all well likely aware, there are certain companies that get more airtime on journals than others. You can see it in a number of different spaces, but definitely tech journalists are out there and really working to keep the companies honest. In part, not in, I shouldn't say in partnership with the regulators, but in a similar manner that the regulators are working to represent their people as well. Any other questions?
I did see one come through the chat.
1 second, let me have a look.
There are actually a couple there.
Okay, how should consumer requests be handled when working at a HIPAA-regulated entity? Yep. So HIPAA is a special type of privacy, as you can imagine, with working in healthcare or even healthcare adjacent areas. I would personally recommend having the inquiries come in through a single channel. But in that single channel, I'm a big proponent of having contact forms that will allow the team to kind of control the type of inquiries that are coming in. And so let's say someone wanted to escalate an inquiry that was very specific to their health information, that could touch on or trigger HIPAA requirements. In your contact form, you can have a specific question or bubble on that form that allows the individual to say, hey, I have a question related to my health information, right? We never want to put the individual in a corner where they're sharing or divulging personal information where it's not necessary. So we wouldn't want them to add say their blood type, or add their medical procedure, or conversely, we don't want them to add their social security number in order for them to exercise their rights. And so from an operations perspective, there's actually kind of an art to creating a contact form that asks just enough information to be able to identify the individual and validate that they are who they say they are. Also giving them the opportunity to identify what they're asking about or which right they're exercising, without forcing that individual to divulge so much information that the individual feels like they don't even want to exercise that right, because they're going to be giving the company even more information than what they feel the company needs. So it's kind of a healthy balance there. Then next question in the chat is, what leads to the differences in how long each privacy operation takes? For example, a few weeks, a few days. Is there an effective way for individuals to track their data subject right request and the progress? So let me answer the first question with regard to the differences in how long it takes each privacy operation team to answer. This goes back to the maturity of a privacy operations team and the business itself, the larger business itself. Some of the most mature privacy operations teams can respond on average in less than 2 minutes and complete a data subject right in that timing. However, when we think about the response to a data subject request or a DSR, there's a number of criteria that we want to take into consideration. One is the tooling on the back end. So has the company strategized such that most individuals can exercise their right to access with a tool? Let's say, I'll use Facebook as an example. There's a tool on Facebook that allows you to see the different types of information that the company has collected about you or has inferred about you. That tool, Microsoft has a similar thing. Those tools really allow individuals to kind of self-serve to find out what type of information the company may have about them or may have inferred. If that tool does not doesn't satisfy the individual's request, or maybe they have some nuanced requests about a specific type of data point, then they can go through and submit the request through the contact form and or through the alias. And then depending on the complexity of the individual's request, that will also be a factor or criteria that will change the timing for how long it takes to really answer that request. So the criteria really is dependent on the maturity of the company, the strategy that they've implemented from a data perspective or a data governance perspective, and then the complexity of the inquiry itself. Most inquiries are quite simple and can be answered either with a self-serve tool and or can be answered in less than 2 minutes. For the more nuanced ones, that's really kind of case by case dependent. And then to your second question, on, is there an effective way for individuals to track their DSR and the progress? I'm not sure if we can say it's effective, but usually, the communication that the individual receives from the company will be in the form of an email. So even though the individual may be submitting an inquiry via contact form, most commonly what I've seen is that they will get a response back via email. And so, obviously you've got the timestamp on your email to know when you submitted it, or rather when the response came back. And it could be on the individual to, if they wanted to track the timing, but on the back end, from a company perspective, they are or should be tracking the timing for every single inquiry that comes in, because there are requirements from various regional perspectives on when responses need to be submitted, or rather when it needs to be closed. Next question is, a lot of information is currently weaved into aggregated results or is training data for ML and AI algorithms. What user rights exist in such cases? You're right, Aman. A lot of information is found in aggregated results. So this is where, those types of inquiries come in. I would say that that's one of the more complex inquiries. And so for privacy operations, you would want to work with your legal team to establish a strategy on, actually not just the legal team, but also a data governance team, if one exists, to really establish how you're tracking the type of information that's being created as a result or in the process of your machine learning and AI capabilities. The training data, usually companies will usually have a board that will make a determination as to what their strategy is for training purposes to train their models. And that board may come out with, or that company may come out with a blog to talk about how they're training their models, whether or not they're using personal information, what type of consent is collected, opt-out consent or opt-in consent, in order to train their models. So that's usually a conversation that's, starts at the highest levels and then is effectuated or actioned upon throughout the company to ensure consistency in how that information is collected and identified, really. Next question is, do users even need to be notified? Like recently, a lot of companies are making deals with AI companies without proactively informing their consumers. Notification, transparency, consent, those are all key pillars of privacy. Do they need to be notified? It really depends on how their information was collected in the first place. And this is where we start to get into the details of the privacy policy or the privacy notice that each company is required to have. What I would suggest, coming from an individual perspective rather than from a business perspective, is individuals, if they are concerned about how their information is or might be used for training purposes, sending an email or filling out a request to find out if their information is in fact, or confirm whether or not their information is in fact being used for training purposes is an option. And many individuals are doing that, especially as we're seeing a lot of news or rather media articles around, what kind of information is being used for training purposes. So absolutely, I think that individuals can and have been submitting just direct requests into there. Whether or not they need to be notified, that's a business question and a legal question. Next question. This is a timely discussion given today's release of CPPA enforcement advisory on applying data minimization to consumer requests. Yep, that one is a doozy. Okay, all right, let me move on to the next slide. So I've kind of up-leveled, as you can see here, some of the most important components to operationalizing DSRs from a business perspective. And I've bucketed them in terms of prioritization of, what you must have, what you should have, and what's nice to have. Data tagging from the get-go is absolutely crucial. You must know what data you have. You've got to be able to kind of track that information and how it's being used and which teams within your business are able to access it. For what purposes are they accessing it? Like this is table stakes, must have. A data map, all companies should have it. Many companies don't. And it's not easy. One, it's not easy to create because data maps are so complex. Even for the smallest companies, the smallest startups, it's still going to be pretty complex. And even more complex is maintaining those data maps. As a company grows and scales, and you bring in more and more super smart, creative people who are able to use that information, the data map, the maintenance of it is incredibly difficult to maintain. And so having proper data tagging is a tool that allows us to maintain the data map and the flow and the access across the board. A unique identifier, this is also important, and really kind of a nuance that is crucial to being able to honor data subject rights. So let's say, for example, you have a body of consumers or individuals who, let's say they sign up to your app, and if they're not using and forced to use let's say one email address, and they're able to log in using multiple different email addresses, that is going to kind of water down or really complicate a company's ability to honor data subject rights, because they're not going to know if Joe Smith at gmail.com is the same as Joe Smith at hotmail.com. So, it's really important to have that one unique identifier that will allow a business, specifically privacy operations, to be able to respond back and say, yep, you've requested your right to access, and here's all the information related to Joe Smith at gmail.com. Next is the self-serve tool. I talked a bit about this. It's a nice to have, but if the company is anticipating a lot of interest in their product, a lot of interest, say, in individuals who may want to exercise their privacy rights, a self-serve tool it just makes a world of difference in terms of reducing the amount of time it takes to respond to that inquiry or to that request, as well as driving accuracy, because you're doing something that can be automated, leveraging the data tagging. And then finally, from a business perspective, having that self-serve tool allows businesses to reduce the amount of staff needed to respond to the volumes of the privacy requests. Finally, a contact form. As I mentioned before, contact forms are fantastic for DSRs, as opposed to the alternative, which is an email alias. With email alias, number one, you're prone to getting a ton of spam. People can also kind of infiltrate with malware, which is not awesome for any business. And it takes a lot more time to be able to read and decipher what an individual is requesting when you kind of give them a free text. Any questions there?
I was wondering if you had any kind of lessons learned or best practices for implementing self-serve tools.
Yeah. So with self-serve tools, this is a really cool space. I would actually recommend if you, I don't know if anyone here has Facebook or Instagram accounts, but I would play around with that tool to see what information is available. Some of the best practices, or rather lessons learned that I've seen with self-serve tools is identifying what information the company can share and kind of recall that information for the public in a quick manner. There are going to be, or there is a requirement or a necessity to work with your legal teams to understand what information can be shared with the public, immediately versus what information cannot be shared. You also have to think about risk of harm to the individual, how you're protecting that information. Can you protect that information with a self-serve tool? So, bringing in your security, your information security team, bringing in your legal team, your data governance team to really understand from a holistic business perspective, what are we able to do? What should we do? And what should we not do? So scope is definitely important as you build out your self-serve tool. And then finally, you'll bring in your UX to make it actually usable, because products and ideas are great, but if no one can use it, then it's kind of a failure in that regard. Any other questions on this slide? No? Okay. Let's talk about design to usage. So this is one of my favorite kind of next steps when you're thinking about why DSRs, like having a program around DSRs is important and can actually be a net benefit to the business, is the fact that, if you have the ability to create a contact form, or even if you're using an email alias, establishing a baseline of metrics of the types of inquiries that you're receiving and from which geographies is very important from a business perspective, because it allows the business to craft their responses such that they can be helpful, they can satisfy the individual's request, and they can be sent quickly with the same language over and over again. Now, that language obviously has to be reviewed by legal to ensure that they're not creating more risk for the business, right? Because you want to be consistent in what you're sending back. Obviously, you're not going to send other people's data to the wrong person, but you want to be consistent from a business perspective on what you're saying. In the contact forms, when you start understanding which regions, which countries are interested in what type of information, this will really help the business to not only understand their clientele or understand the consumers in those spaces, but it will also help them to get ahead of, say, certain types of scrutiny. So, for example, with data subject rights, let's say a company is receiving high volumes of data subject rights, just unusually high volumes, and maybe it's from a specific region. We have seen correlation of high volumes from specific regions to media attention, media that originates from that region, and then later down the line, regulator inquiries and interest and scrutiny from that region. And this is why I go back and say that, the title of this whole talk is The Underdog of Privacy. The information that you can get and anticipate from data subject rights is so valuable and can be so valuable to a business if you structure your program correctly. And it really can enable a business to get ahead of media interest, to get ahead of regulator interest, because it is a public-facing channel. You are getting feedback directly from individuals and really understanding what they care about, where there may be problems in your products, what they're experiencing from a user perspective, and even non-users as well. And these, all of those criteria are the types of things that the media can get wind of, that regulators can get wind of. And so why not use this direct feedback from individuals to improve your products, to improve the practices of the business itself before, it gets any worse. So leveraging those metrics and using that information to feed it back into the business to make improvements is really a win-win for everyone involved. Any questions there? Okay, I have some questions for you all, because I want to know what you're working on. As I mentioned in the beginning, I like learning, I like knowing what's going on, so if anyone's able and comfortable sharing, I'd like to know what you're currently working on that could benefit the design and support of DSRs. Crickets? How how long has this class, like when did the class start? What month?
Yeah, so I mean, we have this seminar every semester. So our kind of attendance base is divided between students here on Pittsburgh's campus enrolled in the privacy engineering master's program, as well as a handful of other master's programs, as well as folks who graduated from our privacy engineering certificate program, like yourself. So we're seeing an increasing number of those in attendance as well. So yeah, I guess it's a little hard to tell right now who's on the call, but it might be primarily students here at CMU and who might not necessarily have the same experiences or implementing DSARs, but have benefited from learning from your experience for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, I guess kind of going back to the usability aspect, I think we've been seeing some research work kind of behind the design of making these designs more accessible. So that's been kind of an interesting line of work that has been coming out recently.
Yeah, it's the DSR space, I think, is super fascinating. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've seen so many different sides of privacy in effect, or in action rather, from a business perspective. And DSRs sometimes tends to be prioritized lower, and not truly appreciated. But I hope that, after this talk, as you all continue to learn more and to go into your business practices in the future, that really start to dive into DSRs. It's such a great listening signal that really not only helps to drive trust within your business, but it really helps to understand your business and understand the people that you're serving, which is a win-win again.
An interesting development that we actually had a presentation by someone from Consumer Reports last semester was the development of the permission slip app. I don't know if you're familiar with that app, but it'd be interesting to hear kind of on the other side how kind of companies are dealing with requests submitted through automated mechanisms or through kind of these authorized agents.
Yeah, so I saw the beginning of that a few years ago. I will preface my answer by saying that the response or a company's decision to respond to those types of requests should be done in concert with your legal team. There are many different agencies or companies that started to kind of create a business model around full scale or broad base data subject rights requests. And the challenge there from the other side of the coin is ensuring that you as a business are not actually creating a data breach by giving unauthorized access of someone's personal information to someone who shouldn't have it, right, is unauthorized. So being able, a company's ability to validate that this company, consulting company X does in fact have authorization from the individual to honor those rights or to collect that information on behalf of the individual, that's the most challenging part that I've seen. In the past, it was you have to have power of attorney in order to get information about a different individual. Now you've got a business model of people kind of assuming power of attorney in collecting information on behalf of other individuals. And that's kind of a gray space. And so that's why I say work with your legal teams to make that determination, because it is setting a precedent, and it could potentially harm the individual, which we never want to do, and also potentially harm the business.
Do you have a sense for or any metrics on how many fraudulent or DSAR requests are actually filed?
So
Malicious.
no, it's a great question. So, in practice, I'll go back to here. In practice with their DSARs, the vast majority of the inquiries that you're going to get are spam. And so that's why I'm a big fan of contact forms, because there's different ways that you can filter out the spam and really separate the wheat from the chaff. But the vast majority, I would say at least 80% that I've seen are spam, which is why operational efficiency is key to being able to honor data subject rights. Whether or not they're fraudulent, the types of, I have seen a number of inquiries that come in that people are trying to get information on behalf of, let's say, their ex-partner. That is a rarity, but it has happened on definitely more than one occasion. Other types of, potentially less than honest inquiries could be hackers who pretend to be someone and they want the information of someone else so that they can continue to steal their identity and create, fake social profiles. That is also a rarity, but it does happen. So that's really why it's important to go back to the strategy of what type of information are we collecting? What is the minimum amount of information that we can collect to validate an individual's identity, but also protect the individual and protect the business from unauthorized access to their information. It's quite a meaty balance.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
We have a comment on the chat, so someone is in the middle of investigating how to automate DSAR processes, but it's quite challenging. And they pose the question, could AI be used to draft customized responses to DSAR requests with a legal review before it goes out?
So can AI be used to draft customized responses? Yes. Should AI be used to draft customized responses? I think we've all kind of seen the media report of, I forget if it was an airline or someone, but the AI was used to respond, not to DSARs, but for customer support, and gave an answer that ended up costing the company a lot of money. I think that as a first level, you can use AI, or you can investigate the use of AI for the identification of what right someone is exercising. Because there are a few keywords that people tend to use in multiple languages when they want to access their information. This is something that is also a bit of an art form, is understanding what people from different regions, what catchphrases, what keywords they use when they're exercising certain rights. Because most people are not going to know the exact language of the law, and they're not going to go to the law and copy and paste it and say, I would like to exercise my right to access according to article blah, right? What they are going to do is they're going to say, hey, I know you're collecting information on me. What do you have, right? And the requirement or the expectation of the business is to be able to read through the lines and say, hey, they're actually trying to exercise a right, their legal right here. So I would use AI to identify the rights that are being asked. I don't know if I would go so far as using AI to draft the customized responses. That you can use AI perhaps to draft a version, but I think that the interaction from person to person is still something that needs to be refined, and we're not there yet. Obviously, there's a potential to, but let's say in the future we do start to use AI to interact with individuals to exercise their rights. That is going to require a great amount of transparency. As you know, many of you are probably aware of the EU AI Act. You've got to, the leaked version, because it's not formally published yet, but you've got to be very transparent when your company is using AI to interact with individuals. And so if you start to do that with a regulatory or regulatory mandated right, then that kind of puts the business in an even squishier space that I'm not sure businesses are willing to risk. You know, it's cost efficiency, but it's also potential harm for accuracy or inaccuracy, if you will. Automation forms require parameters, which helps with fake requests. Yes, absolutely, Dan. So that really concludes the presentation that I had prepared for you all. If you have any questions or you like to chat afterwards, I'm happy to stay on for a little bit longer. Thank you all for your time and for listening to my spiel. And yeah.
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, we just have another comment in the chat that I found that if a request cites a specific law, then that's a flag that there's someone who's a privacy activist, regulator, etc. Regular people don't say something like, don't sell my information. So
Yeah.
there could be clues in the text that's used in these requests as to who is behind the request.
Yeah, Caitlin, you're spot on. There are definitely clues to know, and depending on the volumes of inquiries that you may receive, you know, let's say you're a smaller company that doesn't really receive too many inquiries. You're probably going to have just a small group of people, maybe anywhere between 1 to 4 people that are triaging those inquiries. And you'll be able to spot that because you're very like in the weeds and understanding the people that you interact with. For larger companies that are receiving, you know, tens or hundreds of thousands of inquiries, you're probably going to have multiple tiers of individuals that are reviewing and triaging those inquiries. And the ability to go to review each of those, say, tickets in a quick amount of time and do it accurately is quite difficult. And then on top of that, being able to recognize those catchphrases or the dog whistle, if you will, is another skill set that you might see in a tier 2 or a tier 3, but maybe not a tier 1, you know, depending on your staff.
Yeah, thank you again, Nicole, for joining. I really appreciated your insights today. Yeah, we talk about data subject rights in our classes. So it's good to hear more about kind of the practical implementation and your experiences here. So we can do maybe one round of applause for Nicole, and we'd be happy to have you again, especially on campus if you're ever interested in visiting.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to visit. I'm actually in California right now.